Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are just going to give it a few moments. We have some folks still coming in. So like I mentioned, just a few moments here. All right, I know our team is eager to get going. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. You might notice that the layout looks a bit different from what you're used to, and we are very excited to introduce to you our new webinar platform. This platform is more interactive and customizable for each attendee. So you can personalize your view by moving, resizing, or hiding different elements on the screen. Simply use the corners of the icons to adjust the size or position of the boxes to do so. We encourage you to engage with us using the interactive tools on your dashboard. If you have any questions throughout, please submit them using the questions box on the lower right-hand corner of your dashboard. You will also notice a survey on your dashboard, so please try and fill that out anytime during the presentation. To let us know your thoughts throughout the presentation, use those emojis. To access those, you're going to click the smiley face on the right-hand side of your lower banner. Your feedback is incredibly valuable to us, and it is used to craft our future webinars. For those of you seeking CPE credit, you will need to answer all 4 poll questions during the webinar. These will pop up on the left-hand side of your screen in the box. CPE certificates will be sent out via email within a couple of weeks. And lastly, this session is being recorded. We will send out a link to the recording within a couple of days so you can revisit any part of the presentation. Now that we've got all the details covered, I will turn it over to today's host, Brent Murray. Brent, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie, and thanks for those that joined. As Jamie had mentioned, my name is Brent Murray. I am the Director of Strategic Alliances here at Richey May. My responsibility is to help bring education and alignment between our vendor community and our customers. I'm particularly excited about this webinar. I think you guys will find it valuable. It's a little bit different than maybe traditional webinars that you've been on, where you just see a sales presentation, walk through a PowerPoint, and walk away with little value. The goal for today is to be much more conversational in nature. We're going to tell some cool stories and kind of walk through the importance of cyber resiliency and how to test and train on that. With that being said, we have 2 guests today. The first being Nathan Little. Nathan is the VP of Cyber Insurance and Risk and Response at Arctic Wolf. I'll have Nathan give a quick bio, and then we'll move on over to Michael. Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Originally, I founded an incident response firm that responded to major cyber attacks, ransomware, data breaches, things of that nature. We were acquired by Arctic Wolf a little over three years ago, and that's how I ended up at Arctic Wolf. Arctic Wolf, of course, is a company that provides great 24/7 security services through our managed detection and response. But most of my involvement is with the incident response team, which is a separate team that's still responding to many incidents a year, and there's never a dull moment, and we'll talk about a few of them. Thanks again for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan. And Michael is the acting CISO at Richey May and runs our cybersecurity department. Michael, you want to give us a little bit of background and history on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brent. As Brent said, I act as the Chief Information Security Officer for Richey May. I'm also the partner in charge of cybersecurity services that we provide advisory and technical and managed services to the client base at Richey May. My experience goes back 22 or more years at this point, to where I've just been working in cybersecurity departments, building large cybersecurity programs, and then eventually went into the services side, providing services for organizations that needed assistance, building other cybersecurity programs, maintaining compliance or driving compliance initiatives from a cybersecurity perspective, and landed at Richey May just about 3 years ago, actually, and loving everything that we're doing here.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it. Just to give you guys a little bit of context, the layout of this is pretty simple. It's going to be 5 questions for Nathan, followed by 5 questions by Michael. Again, the goal is to keep this conversational. To what Jamie had mentioned, though, we are going to be doing CPEs through this. You do have to answer all 4 of the questions. They're very short, simple. If you could do your best to respond quickly, it'll save time. I don't feel like singing or dancing or making faces. So if you can help us with that, that would be great. I'm actually going to pull up the first poll question right now. Have you ever been involved in a cybersecurity incident? I guess pretty easy. If you could do your best to click on the screen now, click yes or no, depending on what's pertinent to you. And again, as we continue to whirl through this, there will be 4 total questions, and we'll do our best to keep the conversation moving as quickly as possible. If you guys do have any questions about the screen, it's not working, or you need help, don't hesitate to throw a question into the chat. We're going to continue to move through here. I think we're getting close to the total of 15 that we're looking for right now. I'm going to continue to move through real quick to the next screen. If you guys have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out. It looks like it's kind of broken down. For those of you that have been involved in an incident, I apologize. That sucks. I've unfortunately been a part of a lot of conversations that involve them. We don't wish that on people, but hopefully you can bring value to others that haven't. And for those of you that haven't, hopefully you guys learned some stuff today about what customers or companies like yours are dealing with. With that said, as I had mentioned, the goal for today is to kind of walk through 5 separate questions for both Nathan and Michael. The first question is going to be for Nathan, though. When we talk about incident response, I think it gets a little bit convoluted because there's so many different types of organizations that do different layers of incident response. You think MSPs, MSSPs, insurance companies provide incident response, vendors do. Arctic Wolf has a particularly robust incident response program. Nathan, if you wouldn't mind, can you kind of talk about the breadth and depth in which you guys are able to support customers in, and kind of what makes you different than the rest of the pack?
Yeah, I think it helps to start. You mentioned most of them, but to recap, the typical parties involved when there is a major incident like a ransomware data breach. Many companies these days have a cyber insurance policy. So that's the first party involved, the cyber insurance carrier. So not typically the broker where you work with to get the policy, but the actual insurance carrier that you purchase the policy from. Now, then they will typically have a panel, they call it a panel, of approved providers for other components of incident response. The technical services, like a firm like Arctic Wolf, typically just referred to as an incident response provider, although that's maybe a little bit overly broad, is going to be either approved or not approved by the insurance carrier. At Arctic Wolf, we're approved by pretty much every single one. So the 2 parties so far are insurance, cyber insurance, the incident response provider like Arctic Wolf. The third most common party is an attorney, typically a data breach attorney, sometimes called a breach coach from a law firm that specializes in data security incidents and incident response in general. Insurance carriers also maintain a panel of those legal providers, pre-approved providers. I sometimes, it might offend some of my attorney counterparts in the space, but I sometimes refer to us and the attorneys as like the safe light glass. When you tell your insurance that you have a crack in your windshield, they tell you who to go to. And now it might be Safe Light, it might be somebody else. You may have a few different options, but they've pre-evaluated the quality of the services, pre-negotiated pricing to your benefit to make your policy go further. So those are the 3 parties involved so far. And then, Brett, you mentioned them. The IT service providers and other managed security providers are almost always involved if you have one that you've worked with or continue to work with, because they hold incredibly valuable information. So those are the groups involved. So I think the first thing that's absolutely critical is whether you have insurance or not, but especially if you have insurance, and I guess especially if you don't from a different angle, but you should pre-select a technical incident response firm that you're going to work with. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a retainer. You can pre-select in a lot of ways that are no cost, but you should know who you're going to work with in the event of an incident. Not all incident response providers are created equal. There's many good ones out there, but it's good to meet one ahead of time, know that they're approved by your insurance, know that they're going to do a great job. And like what it means to do a great job is typically obviously doing top-notch services, but also having the right components of an incident response firm. So a good incident response firm is going to help you with the digital forensics and investigation, the finding the root point of compromise, finding the persistent threats, all of the stuff that people typically hear about when they hear digital forensics, or I guess may think about when they hear digital forensics. So that's one component. The next component is the team. The incident response team should have a fantastic threat actor negotiations team that can actually negotiate with a threat actor, reach an agreement, sometimes help facilitate the payment of a ransom if that's the only option, although nobody ever wants to pay. We'll go through a couple of scenarios where it was the only option. Then third, and sometimes most importantly, incident response teams should have other IT professionals. We call it our restoration and recovery team, and we work alongside other IT providers and internal IT teams, kind of just a specialized team that helps collect evidence, help take pressure off the IT teams that maybe have never been through this type of incident before. And then the last component is the 24/7 monitoring component, a team that while the incident response professionals are working, typically a separate team that's staffed 24/7 to make sure that none of the attack comes back, none of the threats that we've identified come back, defend and protect the network through either new security tools rolled out or existing security tools. Many people that brand themselves as an incident response firm, which is fine, may only have a couple of components, may only have one, and it's a little bit clunky because then they have to tag in other people for the other services. So hopefully that answers the question, and hopefully it helps. Obviously, we could dive even deeper than that, but I think that's the easiest way to kind of evaluate, like, okay, is this a complete incident response service?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I think one of the challenges that most folks don't realize when they get into an incident is there's just so many different layers beyond, the legal side, the PR side. There's just a lot of different teams. And if you can find an organization that can do soup to nuts incident response, I think it makes a huge, huge difference. And again, take a lot of weight and really be able to mitigate the amount of time it takes to get back up and running. Michael, I think this is a good lead into your question. We at Arctic Wolf or at Richey May rather have the ability to help identify when there is an incident that does take place, but we oftentimes take in Arctic Wolf to support us. Can you kind of talk about the strategy there and when it makes sense to bring in an Arctic Wolf and why we leverage them?
Yeah. So the services we provide are really the proactive side of incident response services. And so when one of our clients comes to us and says, something's not right, we want to make sure that we can understand what's going on, and then are they experiencing an event? Do we think there is an incident, and do we think that it has evolved into a larger breach? And we want to make sure that we're not unnecessarily sending them in the wrong direction. So triaging from the most basic perspective up front. And so we leverage Arctic Wolf when we think something has gone from an event to an incident that requires the technical capabilities and the skill sets that Arctic Wolf has from an incident response perspective. They through the swath of all different types of incidents can help in any one of those situations. And so we leverage them. And I think it's important to note that, time is of the essence once the initial triage, once it's determined that you have moved into an incident or moved into a breach response, because time is money, right? Downtime is literally determined cost by the Federal Emergency Management Association, right? FEMA has determined that downtime can cost you up to $5,600 or more per minute that you're down as an organization, depending on what your organization does. And so when we have had to leverage Arctic Wolf for clients and potential clients in the past, the integration has been seamless and instant from our perspective, right? We've been able to see a phone call get spun up in less than 15 minutes to start the conversation on what needs to happen. I think Nathan, you made a great point. Pre-selecting your incident response firm, right? Knowing that you may never need to utilize this organization, but if you do and when you do, it's better to have contract terms and negotiations aside so that you can have favorable contracts on both sides rather than having to negotiate while there is downtime at your organization, while there is a potential incident or breach, things along those lines, which is why it's helpful to have that determined ahead of time. Even with cyber insurance, that can still take some time to go back and forth to get the right terms and conditions approved and get people, or boots on the ground, if you will, in an incident. So we leverage Arctic Wolf from the incident response perspective that way. I mean, we love Arctic Wolf, their 24/7 capabilities in monitoring organizations and really preventing events from turning into breaches is really important. But it still happens, right? People get breached all the time. Organizations get impacted by incidents. And so having a partnership with an organization like Arctic Wolf that can assist across that incident response spectrum and that proactive monitoring spectrum with our services is very important to us at Richey May.
Yeah, I agree. I think the time piece is huge, right? And there's nothing worse than when you're going through an incident and having really no plan in place, not knowing who to call. You start by calling your insurance company, and then before you know it, you're 48 hours into an event or a breach and not really having anything moving. So I totally agree there. Nathan, to piggyback off of the incident side, in your tenure, you've experienced lots of different complex incidents. Can you maybe refer to one specific one that was complex, that took a lot of time and effort, and how you guys were able to help assist in that manner?
Yeah, I think one jumps out to me specifically, and I think it's kind of related to the downtime component. Like you guys are both absolutely right. Ransom demand, data breach, everything aside, for most organizations, the downtime is the largest morale hit, the largest financial hit, the largest customer relationship hit, even if it doesn't necessarily directly cost money. It's the most damaging piece of an incident. So a lot of what our incident response team focuses on, and when we first started doing this work, the reason we became so successful and worked with a lot of the insurance carriers quickly is based on our background. We just naturally focused on recovering and restoring as quickly as possible and still doing all the other components. But that's getting clients back up and running has been kind of in our DNA forever. And so one incident jumps out at me specifically, and it's a category of incident that happens every once in a while. But most everybody knows ransomware, their goal is to get into your network and encrypt or delete your backups and then encrypt the primary data, typically. They'll also steal data, because if you don't need to pay for the decryption keys, they'll try to get you to pay for the quote unquote non-release of the data. Now that's a whole different rabbit hole. It's never really worth paying for the non-release of data because the attackers don't delete it anyway. But there are some situations where organizations, in order to survive as a business or not experience incredible hardship, have to pay a ransom demand. Now, where that becomes an even worse scenario, because there are worse situations than needing to pay a ransom, is in the case that I'm thinking of. We had an attacker that came into a network, and I'm trying to remember exactly how it went, but I believe that they deleted the backups, so the backups were not available for use at all. And then the encrypted virtual machines, like on the virtual host themselves. So they ran their encryption tool on the ESXi server at the client VMware product and encrypted the virtual disks directly. Now, usually that is, obviously it's a bad situation, but you can get them decrypted, and whether you have to purchase the attacker's decryption program or another method. But unfortunately, what happened in this situation is the IT person, and this is not necessarily a wrong move, it's definitely a natural instinct, but the IT person shut down the ESXi server when they knew what was happening. But unfortunately, that was mid encryption. And the way a lot of ransomware is written is it writes the metadata for the encryption when it's done encrypting in order to try and be less likely to give itself away to protection tools. So if you shut it down in the middle, like truly power stuff off and not just hibernate, like pull the plug on something, it can cause corruption. And in this situation, the encryption was working through the large virtual data volumes for their most critical data. So it left those virtual disks just entirely corrupted. So even if we would have purchased a decryptor from the attacker, the decryption program itself wouldn't work. Now I'll tell the short version of how we got around it, because the long version is long and gets pretty in the weeds. But one of our team's unique skills is to evaluate the encryption methods and write some custom recovery pieces. Now it's rare that like ransomware encryption these days can be cracked and truly decrypted. We do it often, but it's still rare. In this situation, the encryption, because we had no metadata, nothing, it can't be cracked. The segments of the data were just scrambled. But what our team has discovered, and we don't often share this publicly, but some ransomware, when it encrypts virtual disks, it will just encrypt certain fragments of the virtual disk. It won't encrypt the whole thing because it takes too long. And then when you look at the whole data volume of the ESXi server, they encrypt so little fragments that it's enough to cause damage where you can't access the data normally. But there are ways around it, the way that ESXi caches data and does some other things. So our team was basically able to pull versions of the data out of the free space on the ESXi server, the cache space, to piece together back the virtual disks and get them working enough so that we could pull their database files and their file share files off in a working format for them. So we fixed the corruption. They didn't have to pay the ransom and got them fully recovered, where I think the alternative, like if they were working with a firm that didn't know this technique, is data's gone, sorry. So I think like one of the things our team really prides themselves on is there's always a solution. Like there's always something we can do. And even if it's not part of the standard playbook, like we will find it. So that was still a terrible situation for the client, because that did take us several days to do. We had to write some code, move a lot of data around, but we did successfully get them back up and running when there was a point that they didn't know if they would ever have any of their data back.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And it's super unique that you guys can create custom stuff like that. And I think a big part of it is just having a robust team of people that specialize in different things. The other thing I like about that story is that you talked about time. Yeah, maybe it would have taken some time, but the alternative was losing everything and starting from scratch. And sometimes time is important from a response standpoint, but if you just cut losses and say, hey, we lost everything, there's nothing we can do about it, we got to move on, you're starting in a much more unfavorable situation than spending the time like you guys did to come up with something custom. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, there's
Michael,
very few companies that can survive the loss of all their digital data like immediately for their core products. Now some companies have enough in the cloud that they can rebuild, they can adapt, but very few companies can survive not having any data. And that's the core premise why ransomware has been such a successful attack from the attacker's eyes over the last 10 years, is if you successfully prevent companies from accessing their data, their choices are not surviving as a company or paying a ransom. I mean, neither of those options are good, but paying a ransom is the better one.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Michael, anything to add there? Otherwise, I'll jump into your next question.
I thought it was great, Nathan, when you brought up, right, like some incident responders don't have certain skill sets, and I've been a part of different incidents where, right, like the IR firm chosen basically says like this isn't our forte, and so they have to go back to the drawing board and bring in another firm that may or may not have that experience. It just adds more time and complexity to an overall cost of recovery from that. And so that's why it's like super important to make sure that you're asking some questions ahead of time. You're doing some due diligence in this, And we'll talk more about that as we go through this presentation or this chat, because I think that's like super important to talk through, like preparation wise.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the feedback, and I agree with you. Michael, in the same context, like you've been in cybersecurity for 22 plus years, right? And you've been a part of some large breaches and small, and all sorts of different types of incidents that you've supported to some capacity. Is there any one that kind of sticks out to you that you want to share about today?
Yeah, I mean, I've got way too many stories about incidents. I think, when I first got into cybersecurity, right, like viruses were the big thing. People were worried about Trojan horses, right? Like ransomware didn't truly exist. And then like the first ransomware that ever hit, I was working for the state of Colorado at the time, and a single device got ransomware, and it was like $500. And I was like, what do we do? Like they were like, it's $500. Like let's delete the device and start over again, right? Like it was this integration into the evolution of ransomware where like single devices were getting hit, right? You weren't writing intensive network crawling ransomwares that would impact massive data sets. It was just one or two, right? But I've been right like through that transition, and as I moved into more of the advisory side of cybersecurity, right? I worked for a large restaurant group that everybody's probably eaten at once in their life. I'm not going to call out names in this one. And I was advising them, and we were looking through some of the alerting and logging that was happening, and we identified the use of this malicious PowerShell application called Empire. And as we were walking through it, I was like, hey, this is something that we should probably investigate a little bit further, right? Typically when a consultant says, hey, let's investigate this further, there's two options. Option one is no, or option two is, well, now we have to spend a little bit of money to investigate to see if this is the right way to go, right? And so they chose to not investigate, right? I got told that it was just one of their admins playing around. And over the next month and a half, they let this application run, and things happen inside of their environment that were indicators of compromise throughout their environment. And it ended up about 4 months later, they let out a press release saying that 100,000 plus credit card numbers were stolen from this restaurant and across the world, their worldwide chain. And right, they faced PR nightmares, right, rather than doing the steps proactively to take a look at it, whether or not it involves using a third party or not. And so, right, that story really is one that I bring up often to say, hey, there's a better safe than sorry aspect to a lot of this. If you don't truly understand, it's best to not leave it up to the imagination, right? It's best to drive some solid facts towards why these things are happening in a network, investigate, and then if not, right, it's better to spend a little bit of time, effort, money, whatever it takes to resolve it, than it is to come back months later and realize that you're now millions and millions of dollars out due to PR, identity theft protection, which you have to provide legally. In most states, you do have to notify state attorney generals throughout processes if X amount of number of people are hit. It's different per state. And then you are listed on a website as being a breached organization. And so there is a lot that happens with this that, right, like doing the work up front and making sure to be proactive about it, I think is, again, one of the key areas that I like to focus on when it comes to incident response.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it's one of those things, see something, say something, but do something. And if you're not quite sure what it is, find somebody that knows how to qualify whether or not it is something worth digging into, right? I just got my dog back from the vet. She had a lump that we found in her chest, right? We assumed that she was probably just getting an older dog and that she might be fine, but we brought her to the vet. Fortunately, it turns out that she's fine. But however, if that would have turned into something cancerous, it would have been a lot more devastating. So see something, say something, do something. And if you can't do it yourself, find somebody that can.
That's why employee training is so important when it comes to incident response as well, right? You want to train your employees, right, heavily on identifying like malicious looking emails, things along those lines, but it expands beyond that to text messages, anomalies on your systems, people walking through your office that don't need to be there. I got a call the other day from a client and said, "Hey, I received this thing in the mail that said that I had been breached, and it wanted me to scan a QR code. Before I do that, should I wanted to check with you." And I was like, "Please don't scan the QR code. If you don't mind, take a picture, send it to me. We'll do some forensics on the QR code and the website that it's taking you to." Things along those lines, right? Like training people to be vigilant and more wary than not, right? Ask those questions is super important to the preservation of any organization.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to move into our next poll question. It should be on your screen here in just a second. Again, if you're looking for CPE credits, this is what we need to fill out. If those of you that are on could please continue to answer the question. The question for this one is, do you plan on taking part in a tabletop exercise this year? Yes, no, maybe after listening to this content. Again, we'll try to move on to the next conversation pretty quickly, but if you could fill this in, that'd be great. I'm going to take a quick sip of water while we wait for attendees to put their responses in. Just as a time check, we're about halfway through, so we'll continue to pick up the pace. We have 3 questions left from a question and answer for Nathan and Michael, and then we will have 2 more poll questions after this. So thank you guys for participating. I'm going to see what we have for responses here. Looks like it's kind of right in the middle, right? That's a good response. I'm glad that some of you guys already have it on plan. For those of you that have not planned to do so, we'll talk a little bit more about tabletop exercises. And if you have any questions beyond that, feel free to reach out to us. Now, moving into the next question, Nathan, this one goes back to you. I think one of the things that it's noticed and people talk about it, but you don't really understand until you go through an incident, is the stress that comes with it. There's so many different layers to an incident. It's not just about rebuilding. When you have customers that are calling you on their worst day and they're stressed beyond belief and they're concerned about their businesses falling off the radar, how do you help mitigate that stress and help build confidence in the process of recovery?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think before we talk about how we mitigate it, the two most, and we've naturally talked about it a lot already, but the first of the 2 most common stressors is the question we get on our first call with a victim organization that has an outage because of a cyber incident is, are we going to be up and running by tomorrow morning? It could be 11 p.m. It could be 3 a.m. Are we going to be up and running in the morning, which is just 5 hours? That is oftentimes the executive, the business owner, someone's first question, because it's the most important. Like, can we have school on Monday? Can we ship out orders on Wednesday? Like those are the questions, and those are the major stressors. And inevitably what happens is, unless the organization is very well prepared with a well-tested disaster recovery plan, maybe some failover systems, like really, really good plans that define exactly how they're going to be back up and running in 12 hours, it's typically not possible to get people up and running in the morning. Now it sometimes is. Like our fastest time from ransomware attack, encryption, company is down, to back up and running safely is 37 minutes, because that company had failover systems. We quickly found the root point of compromise. We were able to use their existing security tools to recover them. So it is absolutely possible, but it all depends on how prepared you are ahead of time. In the moment when the attack happens, I often explain to people, hey, we will do everything we can to get you back up and running by Monday or whenever that goal is. But sometimes we need to play the hand we're dealt. Like we have to work with the systems that were in place. We have network speed limitations. We have storage limitations. There's all sorts of these limitations that are just decided ahead of time that dictate how quickly we can get people back up and running. So that is by far the biggest stress that organizations experience. So then because that is such a huge stress, and there's related stresses, then once we get comfortable with the restoration timeline, whether it's 3 days, 5 days, a week, depending on the organization, the next stress related to that is, okay, what's my business's reputation going to be? Did we have data compromised? How long is this going to go? Do we need to pay a ransom to recover? Like, do we have working backups? Those are all the next stressors, and I'd almost bunch that into the first category of like executive stress. Those are the things that the executives, the business owners care about. The next most stressed person that we work with, even more so, is the internal IT team. Typically, not every one of our clients has their own internal IT team. Many do. That team is typically incredibly stressed because as much as we take stuff off their plate, they're still needed heavily in the response. So they have hours or days with very little sleep. They're under a ton of pressure to accomplish tasks to get things back up and running. But then they also have the added pressure of there's so many unknowns during an incident. Like, what happened? How did this happen? The IT person in the back of their head is like, gosh, did I miss something? Like, did I make a mistake? Did I open a phishing email? Because oftentimes we will know that the attacker uses certain internal accounts on the IT team to move laterally through the network. Like, that will be immediately apparent based on how encryption is done. So then that IT person, they may have done nothing wrong at all. The attacker may have just like used the domain controller to spoof their identity or compromise their creds. But they're like, holy cow, like my account was used by the attacker. Like, what did I do? So handling the stress and anxiety from the IT team, just because this is tremendously stressful for them, is something we work really hard at. We explain to the IT team, hey, 80% of the time, the attackers are operating with some sort of IT person's credentials. Their whole goal, once inside the network, is to gain access to one of those admin credentials. It is probably just purely coincidence that they were able to compromise yours. It doesn't mean you opened a phishing email. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. There are times where maybe it does, but we help make them feel comfortable that although they might feel alone in this incident and in this moment, like this is how incidents unfold at companies. And sometimes very well secured organizations have major incidents, because when you have hundreds of thousands of attackers and robot attackers, AI attackers trying to get into networks, compromises are bound to happen. So it's the executive stress, the reputation, the downtime, and then it's the internal IT team's stress that we handle the most and have to make everybody feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it Michael, this is going to go back to you when we talk about dealing with stress. Nathan, you alluded to this. A lot of it is out of your hands before it gets there, depending on what they have done prior to prepare. One of the things that we often talk about, Michael, with our customers is tabletop exercises. That's why we put the poll question in here. I think there's a lot of value to be had with doing a true tabletop. Can you kind of talk about what is a tabletop and why is it valuable, and how do we leverage them to help build out a robust incident response plan for our customers today?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many types of tabletop exercises as well, right? There's those that focus on incident response, those that focus on business continuity or disaster recovery. So maybe something that's not cyber related, but still impacts, right, the digital aspect of your organization. If a tornado hits your building and you don't have the servers you need, things along those lines. And then even just inside of each of those two different types of tabletops, there are technical and executive, and you try and focus on where you want to uncover gaps in that. And right, most organizations in regulated industries like financial services, healthcare, things like services like or industries like that, are required to do at least a tabletop annually. It doesn't have to be hosted by a third party, but what you want is something that is comprehensive enough to build a lessons learned document from, right? If you ace your tabletop exercise and something's gone wrong, right? You shouldn't be coming out of your tabletop exercise saying, "Oh, we're perfect," right? Because no incident, and Nathan will agree with me on this one, there's never been an incident ever that has happened where, pardon me 1 second. The computer's making noises and I don't know why. But there's never been an incident out there ever that has ever gone smoothly.
Someone's calling about your car's extended warranty, I think.
No, it's not even a cell phone. It's just a noise making thing. But right, not once has an incident ever gone so smoothly that there hasn't been some sort of impact or some sort of financial obligation that has come out of it. And so it's really important to note that, like, if you are going through a tabletop exercise, it really needs to be, and this is going to be the nerd in me, right? The Star Trek, like Kobayashi Maru, right? Like, it's set up for you to fail so that you can understand those gaps and those areas inside of your organization that need to improve, right? Whether it's a technical capability, right? We get in here and, oh, our technical team doesn't understand how to do X, Y, Z, or the CFO, like, nobody knew who to contact in order to spend money in this time. And so we were down for 5 hours while we were trying to figure out who needed to write a check or who needed to do X, Y, and Z. So it's important to call out those types of things. We want there to be failure so that we can uncover growth through those tabletop exercises.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really key point. The whole idea is not to just run through a tabletop exercise, assume everything's perfect, and then we just move on. It's no, how do we catch ourselves? What are we actually taking away? And really, what are we going to learn from this? We're going to continue moving on. I'm announcing it again, guys. Here's the next poll question is coming up. You should see it here in just a second. The question is, how often does your organization conduct pen tests? Are you guys doing it annually? Is it every couple of years? Rarely? And we do not conduct, this says tabletop exercise, but let's just assume it's pen testing. We'll wait here for a couple of seconds. Please put in your answers, and then we'll continue to move forward. I'm going to take a quick sip of my drink again. Thank you. Also, as you guys are filling this out, if you guys have follow-up questions or thoughts, please, again, don't hesitate to ask us questions. If you guys want to see another webinar down the road that features a different type of cybersecurity, by all means, don't hesitate to let us know. We're open to ideas, and we really look forward to continuing this process. I am going to move on. If there's any other questions, feel free again to reach out. Looks like most of you guys are doing this annually. That's awesome. We highly recommend doing it annually. There's a lot of value that comes out of pen tests, especially when you're doing real pen tests. If you're looking at just doing a check the box insurance pen test, that might be helpful for insurance purposes, but we highly recommend doing a real pen test and really getting in the weeds. And again, finding the problems so that we can solve them. If we're doing baseline pen testing, chances are bad actors are going to get around a baseline pen test. So be strategic, take it serious, and do it really, really well. We're going to move on to the next question here. We'll continue to pick things up. I'm going to move on to Nathan. I think this is really important. Let's just assume that I'm a customer or an organization that has very basic incident response planning built out. Maybe I've created a brief incident response plan that's sitting on a web document or a Word document somewhere, but I really want to start taking cybersecurity incident response planning seriously. What are some of the absolutely you must do these types of things within a year? And what do you recommend to customers as they're preparing to plan for incident response?
Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of organizations fall into that bucket. They have an incident response plan from a template in a Word document or elsewhere, which is a great spot to start. Obviously, what I mentioned at the start, pre-selecting an incident response firm, knowing which law firm you're going to work with, making sure they're approved by your insurance. That's incredibly important, incredibly easy. Obviously, we have products that allow you to accomplish working with us, but you can also pre-select us through your insurance broker. Just say, hey, I attended a webinar with Arctic Wolf. hopefully you think we know our stuff, and you can pre-select us. But then beyond that, I think the most important things, we've again naturally talked about them, that I would add to an incident response plan is I would add in scenarios and a predetermined response goal. Like, so typically it's best to accomplish this testing and reach this timeline that you estimate through a tabletop exercise. That's the best way to do it. But being realistic, okay, if we get hit with ransomware, how quickly is our goal to recover? Now, you have to do this. The reason why I say it's helpful with a tabletop, you have to do this keeping in mind that it's very rare that you can just immediately restore backups. You don't know the attacker's persistence mechanisms could be in that backup date you restore. The attacker could still be elsewhere in the network, like through VPN, and you might just be exposing your restoration methods to the attacker. So in that timeline, you have to include the amount of time for an IR firm working with you and your IT provider to get the network safe. It's typically a few hours at a very minimum, could take up to 24 hours in more complex situations, although we try to keep that rare. The other thing, though, that I find that people estimate that you should certainly include in your tabletop, but in your estimate of restore time, is if you don't have a separate location to restore to, like a separate storage location, if you're in the cloud, if you're in AWS, or if you're in Azure, it gets a lot easier. But if the only servers you have are the storage of the servers that you run primary, and those are encrypted, we don't recommend just restoring backups over those encrypted systems. You can. Sometimes it works okay. But the real risky approach there is if you start to restore and then the attacker somehow manipulated your backups, or maybe outside of the attacker's actions, they just weren't working as you expected. Maybe databases were still corrupted or not backing up properly. We see that a lot. And if you overwrite that encrypted data, you remove the possible path of decryption to restore others. So what we typically recommend, at least for sensitive systems, is we take a full copy of them before they're restored over. A lot of people think that's just for evidence. That's actually not the most important piece. The most important piece is preserving that path to restoration if we need it. And that can take a long time. It can take multiple days if you have hundreds of terabytes of data to move. So I think if you have a basic incident response plan, there's a lot of things you could add to it. We could talk a ton about it, but I think doing at least an honest self-assessment of, hey, how long would it take us to recover? The reason why I recommend this to organizations is that removes one of the biggest stress points of responding, which is surprise that it's going to take 4 days to recover. Because then, the team that's involved in the incident response plan, when you start to do the math and you say, okay, let's allow minimum of 12 hours to get the network secure. Let's say we allow a minimum of 24 hours to preserve the data, could be 48, put ranges in there. Well, you're already at almost 2 days, and then maybe it takes a day to restore backups. You're at 3 days, best case scenario. And then I usually tell people to double it as a buffer, because attackers do creative things to make your life more challenging. So 3 to 6 days, I think, is a common restoration timeline we run into. The average is actually much higher than that, because most organizations aren't well prepared. The average is actually 21 days of at least partial business interruption. But if you put that on paper in the incident response plan, then everybody can decide, okay, are we comfortable with this? Hopefully we never have an attack, but if we do, are we comfortable with expecting at least a week of downtime? If not, there's probably some proactive things you need to do to improve that. And it's fairly reasonable to get it to a 24-hour time frame. You got to plan and invest. So I think that's probably the most helpful exercise that somebody could add to a basic response plan.
You just said something that prompted a question, so I'm sorry for kind of going off task here, but being that cyber insurance is so important for organizations, when you're going through this planning process and you think that you may be down, 5 days, 7 days, 20 days, whatever you settle at, how do you evaluate the amount of insurance to be able to protect yourself financially in the event that you do go through a breach? How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, the best way is going to be having a broker that is actually really good at cyber insurance that can help you understand how high of a limit you can get, um, help you understand like maybe what similar organizations that have had incidents have experienced in using their policy. Um, but most organizations can kind of do the calculation. Now, I'm very involved in the insurance industry from my lens. I've never sold insurance. I've never like set limits or anything. But what I see organizations doing is saying, okay, our IR plan that I just talked about with our realistic restoration timeline is six days. So you know that you have 6 days of potential nearly full business interruption where you're probably not making any revenue or maybe just partial. So how much revenue are you going to lose in those 5 days? Most insurance has like a 24-hour time before business interruption kicks in, meaning if you restore within whatever you lose in that 24 hours is covered by you. I might not be explaining that correctly, but then business interruption kicks in. So however much money you're going to lose in those days is how much insurance coverage that covers business interruption you should try to get. But then you also need to add in the other components. It's not uncommon for organizations to have to pay a $300,000, $500,000, $1 million plus ransom. Now, if you're the size organization like the ones that you hear in the news that get ransomed, you're in a whole different ballpark of insurance. You're talking insurance towers and tens of millions of dollars of coverage. But if you're a more common middle market organization, you probably need to plan for 500,000 to $1 million in a ransom. If you did unfortunately have to pay one, again, hopefully you don't. But then your broker can help you understand the other costs of an incident, like the litigation, the data breach coverage. So all of the expenses add up quickly. Now, most organizations will find that depending on your security practices, you can get 2 million in coverage, 3 million in coverage. $1 million is very common from what we see. So sometimes, depending on how secure you are, you may need to shop around a bit to get enough coverage to cover your estimated losses. But a good broker will help you dive deep and understand all that and get you in a really good spot. We have a insurance broker partner team that we've vetted and we know are great at cyber insurance, just teams that we regularly work with. So feel free to reach out to the Richey May team and we can coordinate if anybody needs help doing that analysis or finding the right type of broker, because they don't all specialize in it.
Yeah, I appreciate you touching on that, because I think sometimes people are like, yeah, we got $1 million of insurance, or we have $2 million of insurance, and that seems like a really big number. But when you start backing in all of the cost to an incident, you find out really quickly that $1 million to $2 million scratches the surface. So to your point, having a really good broker that can help build that out for you and make sure that the executive leadership team understands what the cost of an event could take place, it'll help you guys, protect against this. Because the last thing you want to do is put insurance in place thinking that you're covered. You end up superseding the cost of the insurance or the coverage of the insurance. And now, again, you're out of pocket a significant portion of dollars. With that said, I'm going to bring the last question to Michael here, and then we'll answer any questions below. Michael, as a CISO, as somebody that has provided vCISO services for a lot of organizations, we talk about vulnerability management. When you're talking with customers, like, what do you think that they need to be considering or thinking about when it comes to vulnerability management?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. When you talk through like what an incident looks like and what an attacker is going to do, right? Oftentimes you hear like 98% of incidents or whatever the statistic is. 98% of incidents start with the human element, right? Somebody clicking on a phishing link. But from that point, they're going to drive, right? An attacker is looking for persistence, right? They get somebody's account, username and password, they get access to a system, and then from there, they're going to look for vulnerabilities throughout your environments that they can exploit to gain more persistence or find data that is, the ultimate goal in a lot of these, or a vulnerability that they can exploit to get the keys to the kingdom, which in this case would be like elevated permissions or somebody else's credentials that has more permissions than the ones that they have. And so, it's important that organizations, and a lot of organizations are required to, due to industry requirements from a regulations perspective, but looking at those vulnerabilities and not just, doing a scan of your network and saying, okay, we've got like 60 vulnerabilities that we need to manage, and we'll accept risk on some of them and we'll fix them on the others, but really understanding the criticality of those vulnerabilities, how they impact your organization, how they could impact your data. And that's really where a pen test is different from a vulnerability assessment or just a vulnerability scan in your environment, is going that extra step to understand what the blast radius is of those vulnerabilities, driving criticality and driving priority to getting those managed. And so it's important to bring that up as a part of your risk when you're talking about incident response as well.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. Hey, we have 4 minutes left. We have one more poll question for you. Those of you that are on, you should see it on your screen here in just a second. Again, thank you for your patience in working through this with us. Hoping that you guys found valuable information in this webinar. Once we're through this last piece, what we'll do is we'll jump back on, to answer a couple of questions. I think we have 2 questions in the chat, and then we'll let you guys get back to your day. If there's anything else above and beyond what you were expecting, feel free to, again, send us an email, let us know what you got going on, and we're happy to support you. And Nathan, again, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. There's a lot of responsibility that you have at Arctic Wolf. We certainly appreciate your partnership, and certainly look forward to continuing to provide value through Arctic Wolf services alongside of Richey May. I think with that, we're close to everybody in. I'm going to move on. It looks like, how confident are you in your incident response plan? I love that portion of you are very confident. That's excellent. I'm glad to hear it. Hopefully you have a lot of support on that. For those of you that are interested in learning more about incident response planning and want to have more of that advisory service side of things, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Richey May team. We're here to support you. It's one of our major skill sets. With that said, we had 2 questions that popped up along the way. The first one is for Michael. How long does it take to conduct a tabletop exercise or a security assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is it depends, as with most things in life and IT. We want to make sure to do an annual comprehensive technical and executive tabletop exercise. At Richey May, we conduct tabletop exercises every month, some with different portions of the team, just to understand different aspects, to build those times that Nathan was talking about on pulling backups and things along those lines. And so if you're only doing it once, I would schedule out a day or 2, right? And start it at 10 o'clock and finish it at 3 or 4 o'clock, and then come back the next day and talk through some things, and then go through lessons learned on another day as well. So usually you can get, the meat of a tabletop exercise done in 4 to 8 hours, right? But it all depends on what your goals are, right? If it is just to test a certain portion or a certain playbook or something along those lines, you can do them faster. If you want a comprehensive soup to nuts tabletop exercise, I've attended some that were a week long, where we went through a realistic scenario from the beginning to where we had to perform the work and things along those lines. So it can be what you need it to be. But I would recommend doing a comprehensive one and then iterative throughout the year as well.
Awesome. Last question, and I'll answer it because it says, how long does it typically take for Arctic Wolf to respond when someone clicks the IRJS button? Almost as fast as it's going to take me to respond to this question. The reality is it's like 15 minutes or less. If you call somebody at Arctic Wolf and need something, they're going to be on it right away. Their incident response team is super fast. When I had an experience where somebody called the Arctic Wolf at 9 p.m. on the 4th of July, and they were on a phone call in less than 5 minutes with the customer. So really appreciate all of you guys joining. Again, Nathan, Michael, I really appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for all the content. If there's anything else you guys want to say, let us know. Otherwise, we'll wrap up.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.